Well, let's go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone. Do we have anybody that's on virtually? There might not be. Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I know that we've had a long day of either language study internships, and yeah, so we have our four wonderful panelists. So thank you all for taking the time to come. Uh, so before we get started, our audience here is mainly with the Korea West program. So the Work English Study Travel, just for some background about our audience here right now, as well as from our Train USA program. So that's kind of who we have out in the audience. But as you know, I'm Emily Kessel, so I'm the program director with Korea West at Cultural Vistas here, and I'm just really happy to be able to have this group of state delegates and from Social Security Administration to talk a little bit more about being a Korean American leader in the government sector. So as you can see, we have that from federal government, kind of going down to the more state level local government. So hopefully they'll be able to give some good tips. Thank you everyone who submitted questions as well. So we'll try to get through as many as we can. Uh, so uh, I'm just going to let everybody kind of introduce themselves, starting with Delegate Mark Keem.
Hello, everybody. How are you doing? And I noticed that there's a camera there and there's a screen back there. So does that mean that there are people watching outside of this room? Yeah. Okay. If you're on camera virtually, I say hi to you as well. 여러분 안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. 저는 마크 김이라고 하고요. 버지니아 주 하원 의원이에요. 저는 지금 사선 사의원 하고 미국에 이민 온 지는 지금 30년 넘었는데 아직도 영어가 편해요. 왜냐면 저는 한국에서 4살 때 떠나서 외국에서 살다가 미국에 14살 때 왔거든요. 그래서 영어를 먼저 배우고 그다음에 불어를 배우고 그다음에 한국말 배웠어요. 그래서 아직도 한국말이 좀 뭐 그냥 대화하기는 괜찮은데 좀 힘든 말은 영어가 편해요. 그래서 나머지는 영어로 하겠습니다. 괜찮겠죠? 근데 나중에 뭐 질문할 때는 혹시 한국말로 질문해도 저는 이해할 수 있으니까는 그렇게 하시려면 하시고 어쨌든 오늘 만나 뵙게 돼서 반갑고 또 다른 좋은 대화를 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Hi, I'm David Moon. I do not speak Korean. And I am a state delegate in Maryland. My constituency is right outside of Washington, D.C., so it's a few suburban and urban towns right next to Washington, D.C. So, part of what I'll talk about later this evening that you hear is sort of my experience as a second generation Korean American, and really why that generational difference has really shaped how I look at life in the United States and the political system over here. My parents, obviously, like many Koreans, came over first generation immigrants after the war many decades ago, and most of their family actually followed them to the United States, and over the years have started coming all over Houston, California, New York, Washington, D.C. But my personal experience has been one of someone with one foot in two worlds, with my parents, upbringing, and sort of my own feeling of being in the 2% of non-European white Americans in the United States, and it's been a very interesting process going into political life. Both in my conversations with my family and the rest. So I'll leave it at that. I'm a Democrat. I come from the very liberal part of the political spectrum, and again, I'll talk about how that collides with my culture in a little bit. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Chang, and I'm also a member of the Maryland House of Delegates. And thank you so much for everyone for coming out today and being able to share some time and have a discussion. And it's been great so far to have conversations with many of you all this afternoon and hear about the different locations of Korea that you've come from and about the risk that you took to come over to America and leave home country and to come into a different culture and environment at a young age. So that's to be commended for doing that. I serve on the House Appropriations Committee. That's the budget committee for the House of Delegates in the state of Maryland, and also serve on the Public Safety Subcommittee. And I'm also chairperson of the Capital Subcommittee in my county delegation. So I usually deal with matters that are fiscal in nature, deal with the state operating capital budgets. I look forward to having a great discussion with you this afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the invite, and it is so good to see all these young people from South Korea. I speak Korean much better than English, but Emily asked me to speak to you all in English, so I will do my best. These three gentlemen are elected officials, and there's only one difference between them and me. That's I am a career person. So I have been in this country since 1976, almost 41 years. I speak, again, perfect Korean, and I'm the only female, so I guess I will have to speak from all-female perspective. I have been with the federal government for the past 21 years, and I started my career when I was 2 years old, only because I went to school in this country, and I got my BS when I was 41 years old. So only in America you can actually achieve something that you really want to pursue. With that degree, I was able to get a job with the federal government because they had a program called Outstanding Scholars Program, and they're required to have a GPA 3.45 and above, and I just barely made it because I had a 3.51. I am getting ready to retire at the end of this year, but I also serve our community because as a bilingual person, knowing two different cultures, I think I can contribute much more. So I'm currently serving as president of the Korean American Women's Society. We just had our 45th year anniversary. I do have 3 adult children, and I got 6 grandkids. So that's my personal note, and then I will look forward to getting some questions from you.
Well, thank you very much. So I guess the format for this is kind of going to be pretty informal. We just have some general questions, and then at the end, please think about if there's anything else that you want to ask our wonderful panelists. I know it kind of already started off by kind of sharing a little bit about yourselves and kind of how, like, where you are with the role that you're currently in. I think it'd be really great if you could share a little bit more about how you kind of went on this path to get into working in the government sector, in the public service in general, and what made that kind of switch? Was it when you were younger? It was that you, such as the age of everyone out here, that you kind of decided you wanted to go on this path, or what made it kind of click that steered you in this way?
I guess I will start. Mine was a pure accident. I was always laughing at government employees because they are well known for being lazy. And they cannot be fired because there's a union, and government managers will have to build up the cases until they're ready to fire someone. But I was reading the Washington Post one day, and there was a little article about Social Security Administration is looking for Asian language bilingual, and Korean was one of them. So I immediately felt that, oh wow, they are looking for me. So I got into my current, well, actually a job doing some claim work in the field office because my agency has over 65,000 employees, and we have over 1,200 field offices. I think you may have heard Social Security number. Anyone who wants to do any type of work here, they have to have a Social Security number. So we actually issue those numbers through our field offices and centers. But I never dreamed that I was going to become one of those lazy federal government employees. But once I got in, I realized that there are lots of people who actually do a lot of work. There are some people who don't. So I do not want to be too judgmental anymore. So that's how I started my career.
My background, share a little bit about my parents' background. My grandparents, and then bring us up to speed of where I'm at. And the reason why I say is because we all have experiences in life. We all go through different backgrounds, and we all have different dynamics in our childhood and our life experiences that shape us. And like many of us, we all have an experience where we're all from an immigrant community, an immigrant experience. The experience I have is that my parents came over here in the 1970s. And my mother, she went to Jinmyung High School in the Cheongwade neighborhood, and then she graduated from Ide. And my father, he was from Daejeon. Then he came over, and they both met each other in Korea. And prior to that, my mother, she was the middle child of 5 children. She was the only girl. And when she was about 6 years old, her family lived in what is now North Korea, Kaesong, so right outside of Pyongyang. And my grandfather, he had a seaweed business. He went to Waseda University in Japan and got a business degree and had a seaweed business. But they left everything behind when my mother was 6 years old. And they snuck out in the dark of night and went to Seoul. And the reason why it's so important for me and for us to know about our background, because it shapes our lives. And my parents, they came over here, and they had the financial barriers, the cultural barriers, the language barriers, and all the other barriers that are included in immigrating over here. And they only had maybe a couple $100 in their pocket. But they came over here because they wanted a better life. They came over here because they had a dream or a vision to do more with their life. And when I was 11 years old, my mother, she passed away suddenly. So I was the oldest of 3 children. And I grew up in a family where my dad, he had a small business, a kage, and he would work 14 hours a day. He was never home. But he had to do what he had to do to put food on the table. And there were many times where we have a program, we have many social service programs in the country, but one of the programs is food stamps. And food stamps is the government would issue a certain amount of dollars to buy groceries and toilet paper and milk and things like that. And my father, he would go down once a month and go down to the social service office to apply for food stamps, to pay for the basic necessities. And especially during this time, about September, October, I always kind of reflect a lot about my childhood because it's preceding the cold winter months. And there were times where my house was bone cold. We didn't have any heat because my father, he couldn't pay the electricity bill. And so he would go to energy assistance and get energy assistance from the different programs that are out there. But I share all that because I never forgot about how the government helped my family, or how neighbors helped my family, or how the community helped my family. And those experiences, when I was a child, I made a commitment that any way I could in the future, when I became an adult, to give back to the county, to the community, to the state that gave so much to me. And that's the reason why I'm in public service, to get up every morning and to be able to help somebody out. So I would just encourage each and every one of you to think about what is your life experiences and to think about how you can better the world in the future.
So my entry into politics probably has a lot to do with my own personal upbringing, and I think like many Korean American kids, my mom was pushing me into engineering or doctor or lawyer, and was focused very heavily on my grades. And for many years I tried to sort of stay somewhere on that path, but my mom's side of the family is half Buddhist, half Christian. My dad's side is Christian. Uh, and in the school I grew up in, it was mostly white, maybe 30% Jewish. And I was one of maybe just a few non-European um, kids in the school. And so with all of this, even at home, I felt a little bit a stranger. My parents would speak to me in Korean, but I would respond in English. So my language wiring is very unusual. And my parents' families had split ideologies anyway. You know, they were both Buddhist and Christian at the same time. It's not like half of the family was Buddhist and half was Christian. No, they were Buddhist Christians. Um, and so, and then when I went to school, it was much the same thing where, I was sort of, I had friends, and so I had a very normal upbringing, but everything seemed a little different to me. And the things that people tried to give to me, a religion, or a culture or things like that, they didn't really feel like my something that I understood or could relate to. So really, I felt like I had to invent it all by myself. And so I started to really see differences in things and people and how they manifested, and it really got me interested in politics and activism. And in the United States, you spend so much time learning about the civil rights history of this country and the struggles over inequality. And so I thought, this is what I want to do. But the United States, I don't know if you've noticed yet, uh, race and ethnicity play such a huge role in American politics, American culture, in subtle ways, in obvious ways. Um, and so when I was growing up, all I could do was I started applying for internships with different social justice organizations and working there. But the U.S.'s politics was so heavily based on a black versus white paradigm, and it still is, I think, in many ways, that even as the population is getting more multi-ethnic and multiracial, the politics is still from the 1960s in many ways with respect to race. So everyone I talked to, I said, I don't think I can ever work in politics. I'm not black. I'm not white. You don't see very many Asians in elected office unless you're in Hawaii or California or somewhere where it's closer, and so there's a larger population. And I thought, okay, well then that's fine. If I really care about this kind of work, I'm going to work behind the scenes. I'll be a campaign manager or a consultant or something like this. And that's exactly what I did for, I don't know, 10 years before the population of my area became multiracial, majority non-white, but it was no one group. It was, 10 different groups, Latino, Black, Asian, Muslim, we're all melting together into our electorate. And finally, it seemed like something was possible. So that was my long approach into politics. And the next challenge for me is, as I sit at a panel like this, what does it mean for me to be a Korean American in politics? Because even though I feel out of place in the political system every day, it's not like every policy decision we encounter has a Korean dimension to it or an Asian dimension to it. And if you care about representing that community's voice, sometimes you have to look for that opportunity and strike it. I mean, the North Korea situation right now is one where Mark actually really brought us together, and we don't often have a excuse to come together from different states as Korean elected officials from around the country. So sometimes it's good that we're here, but at a minimum, I feel like me being here shows other Koreans out there that, hey, look, it's possible. There are people from our background who are in office who eat kimchi and think it's awesome. So I'll pass it on with that.
Well, all three of the speakers here have done a great job in explaining to you the personal stories. And each of you, and I'll take what Mark just said, each of you should try to explore within yourselves the personal reasons why you want to do what you do. Not just in government and politics, but every part of your career, whether you want to go into arts, music, entertainment, law, history, whatever you want to choose. Try to find something that you have a personal connection to, because if you do that, then number one, you'll never forget it, right? That's the reason why you do it. And it's your story, not somebody else's story. But number two, the reason why that's important is because you can also gauge as you move up in your career in some way, as your professional career develops, you can also gauge whether you're making a difference based on what you said you wanted to do. If your personal motivation is what drives you, then you can understand, yeah, I'm making a difference. But if it's just money or status or prestige, it's hard to gauge that, because I know a lot of people who are very wealthy. I'm not one of them. I know a lot of people who are wealthy, but they always want more money. So it doesn't matter how much money they made, they always want more. And so if the goal is to make money, then you'll never be satisfied. But if your goal is to make a difference in people's lives, like Mark was saying, then every day you can say, I did something that helped this person's life, make that a little bit better. And so that's a personal reason why you should get involved in anything you do from that perspective. I'll share in a brief way my story as to why I got into politics and my personal motivations, and it's very much similar to what you've just heard from the other folks here, because we all, whether we're first generation, second generation, or 1.5 generation, as some people call us, we all share the same ethnic background and we share the same history. So I think we have a lot of similarities. This mic is kind of weird, huh? It kind of comes in and out. Anyway, so I'm going to try to speak a little bit more consistently so that the mic doesn't ruin it for you. Many of you are so young that you don't remember this yourself. In fact, your parents are probably my age. And so your parents might be more able to relate to my story than you can. Maybe even your grandparents, some of you. But I was born after the World War II was over. And not only was World War II significant for the entire world, but for the Republic of Korea, it's a very significant moment. Because the day that World War II ended, what we call in America called Victory over Japan Day, is actually in Korea called Dongnip, right? That's the day that Gwangbokjeon, that's the day that you became an independent country. And so for many of us, our parents and their parents' generation, their grandparents' generation, they lived in a country that did not belong to them. Even though they were born there, they had the culture, they had the history, and they had the heritage, they couldn't use their own name. They couldn't use their own language. They couldn't go back to their house and say, I own this house, because it was run by another country, Japan, for almost 40 years. And so my parents were both born in the 1930s during the 일제시대, during the time when the Japanese had colonized Korea. And so by the time they were teenagers, they were finally able to call themselves Korean and have their own country back. And I know that's something that many of your parents and your parents' generation have lived through, but they might not have talked about this a lot. Not that that affected me personally, because I wasn't around, but it affected me in a different way. Because my parents' generation, as your parents as well, and your grandparents, in their mind, the idea of having your own country is very, very important. The idea to be able to say, this is my people, this is my race, this is my people, and we're going to protect this country. That's a very strong personal motivation. And because of that, they made sure that my generation and all of us as immigrants, that we would find our own country. And that was a very powerful motivation for when people immigrate from one country to another country. They want to settle and find their home as quickly as possible, to settle as quickly as possible, because you don't want to be strangers in another country. You don't want to be nomadic. You want to be able to say, this is where I belong. And so that generation drives that mentality. But if you think about that and the Korean War that just happened right after that, World War II ended, all four of my grandparents died during the 일제시대, during the Korean War and beyond. And so I never met any of my grandparents, but they all passed away. My parents became orphans and they met, and that's how we ended up eventually moving. When I was about 4 years old, our family moved from Korea to Vietnam, Vietnam, and Vietnam is what we used to call it. And 5 years after I lived there, Vietnam went through a war. And instead of the war in a situation where the democratic country from the South won, it was a communist country from the North ended up winning and unified the country. The United States spent 20 years there, and we ended up leaving the country in defeat. I was there when that happened. And in April of 1975, when Saigon became communist, my family escaped at the last minute. We left Saigon on the last airplane that left Saigon, and we went back to Korea. My father didn't make it. He got captured by the communists for about a year, and then he was eventually released. And so by the time we came to the United States, I studied history, and like my good friend David Moon, I read a lot about the American Civil Rights Movement. I read about the American history. And one thing I learned was America's history is about people who've gone through struggles and sufferings all over the place, in the United States as well as other countries, who come here and they try to not repeat the same lessons and the problems that they've had. So they try to find different ways to make the government and the society work in ways that bring people together. So that's something that I learned as a as a high school kid and a college student. When I was in college, around your age, I did an internship right here in Washington D.C. I went to school in California, but I moved out here for 3 or 4 months to do an internship on Capitol Hill. And just like you, I was a 21, 22-year-old young, hungry intern. And the year that I was here, that I spent time learning, it confirmed to me 2 points that I always thought. One, the U.S. government is absolutely important. The government has such an important role, not only to American lives, but the whole world's lives. The fact that my parents lived in the Japanese colonialism and then the Korean War had nothing to do with Korea's faults. No matter how much the Korean government did, it was other forces that came in. And the U.S. had a lot to do with those negotiations. The fact that Vietnam became what it was when I grew up there and the war happened and then it ended that way had a lot to do with how the Americans intervened and the Russians and the Chinese and others. And so the idea that the U.S. government plays a role in all of our lives across the entire world meant that the government and those people who are in government, those that make the laws, are very powerful people. And so if they can influence your life and mine, don't you want to have an influence over them, right? So that was my first goal, is the idea that we can change, we can seek change by advocating for change with those that are in charge. So those that are in government, that like Mark was saying, that can help change your lives, those are the people that ought to be important. But the second point I learned was just like what these guys were saying, the 3, 4 months that I was here, this is 1988, so a long time ago. 3 or 4 months that I was here, the only Korean that I ever saw, the only person that looked like me was the dry cleaner or the person that made sandwiches in the store. Or when I went to a Korean church to visit, I saw them there. I never once saw a person that looked like me in Congress, in the White House, in any administration, in the lobbying world. I go to receptions, I go to meetings. I didn't see anybody that looked like me. The only person that looked anything like me was third, fourth generation Japanese American senators and congressmen and their staffers, mostly from Hawaii and from California. But there was nobody else that looked like me doing what I wanted to do. As a result, I said, I'm going to spend the rest of my life, and this is the personal motivation, I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing everything I can to influence the way U.S. government works so that the laws and the rules that it comes up with will help us and not hurt us, whether it's international or domestic. And secondly, I want to make sure that people that look like me are part of that process. Whether you're lobbying, you're volunteering, you're staff, you're elected officials, you're appointed official, you're a career bureaucrat, whatever you do, I want to have as many people that look like me, that have my story, my shared experiences, working in that field. And so now for 30 years, that's all I've done.
I just want to make a point here. You guys are so lucky to have all three of them in this room because Mark Kim made a history in the Commonwealth of Virginia as the first ever elected state delegate. That was back in 2010, 2009. So he became a historical figure. David Moon and Mark Chang, they both got elected in the state of Maryland as a state delegate in 2014. So I need to throw myself in. I am the first Korean American who actually does national level outreach at SSA. And, I told you we'll be retiring soon, and I don't have anybody who's Korean American who can take over. So I just want to make sure that these gentlemen made a history in the state level politics. So you guys are so lucky.
Great. So it's really coming from like very diverse. The definition of Korean American you can see is just very broad. I know that there were a lot of questions that were coming in earlier about, okay, so our speakers, what does it mean that they're Korean American? So this has been kind of a good way to show what some of that first generation 1.5, second generation type of experience can be. I think the next question to kind of segue into that I think is relevant and has been coming from some of our students out here in the audience as well is, have you ever, I guess throughout the course of the career, encountered different types of discrimination based on being Korean American or Asian American, or based on language? I know that there has been different pieces going into different internships that our previous Westies and the current that are in their internships now have asked about in many ways. How do I go in with confidence? How do I go if English isn't my first language, or if I'm going in and I'm the only Korean that's in the office? how do I kind of overcome these? So do you have any experiences and advice to kind of share along those veins?
I guess this question applies to me because I am a first generation and English is not my native tongue. I actually experienced some discrimination when it came to promotion. I actually filed a EEO, that's Equal Employment Opportunity lawsuit. But you know, filing a lawsuit and then getting ready for all these paperwork against gigantic agency, that's a lot of work. And I think I filed one because I thought I was going to get a promotion, but instead there's a white guy who actually got the job. And I went to talk to employment lawyer, and he said I do have a case, so I did. But ultimately, I had to withdraw. But I think as a first generation who speaks English with some type of accent, um, I actually go in for an interview more, I guess, I try to show them, how confident I am for the job that I am applying for. But sometimes it backfires. So I don't know whether I have any ideal advice or any guidance to give out when it comes to language, because that is something that I am still struggling.
This mic is not very good, but I'll try it. Let me tell you. Let me tell you a little story because Marianne mentioned that I was elected in 2009. When I was first elected, I'm sure you guys did the same thing. When you were elected, the state house clerk's office sends you a little thing saying, "Sir, please fill out this information. We're going to update our website, right, with all the elected officials." So come January when we start office, when they click on the website, it'll say, "This is your delegate. This is what they are." So they said, "Send me a picture, your bio, all that stuff." So anyway, I'm clicking through this thing, name, address, where'd you go to school, are you married, do you go to church, religion, the usual things, punching, typing in, typing in. There's a box that's a very typical box that you see, and it says race. And I was going to punch in my race, except I couldn't type it in. It was one of those drop-down menus, right? You know what a drop-down menu is? You click it, and then options come down. And I click on it, and it says white, black. That was it. I'm like clicking, like, there's going to be a mistake. I keep clicking. White and black. That was the only option I had. And so I called the clerk's office, and I talked to the clerk, and I said, "Hey, Bruce, this is Mark Heem. I just got elected, and this and that." And he's like, "Yes." And I'm trying to fill out this form that you asked me to fill out online. Let me ask you, which box should I check on the one that says race? And for about 10 seconds, there was a silence. And then he says, "Oh, my God. Oh, we'll get back to you." So a half hour later, an hour later, I got a call back saying, "Try it again." So I click it. This time it says white, black, Latino, Asian, other. So I was the first Asian immigrant to be elected to the state house. We've had other people that had Asian blood, like a quarter Filipino, half Japanese, but they never identified themselves as Asian because they're very white, and especially in Virginia, it's a very conservative place. And so if you're not white, like you said, if you're not white or black, nobody cared. And there was one Latino person who served in the house before, but he considered himself white because he was a Republican, and his mother was, I think, Cuban or something. So he never considered himself to be a Latino. So the issue never came up. And the point is that there are times when it's very, very, very uncomfortable to be the first. And as many of you know from our culture in Korea, we don't like to stand out too much. We like the group, not the individual, right? It's a family's honor. 남들 앞에서 그러면 안 된다. 조심해야지. You don't want to show off. It's about our group. It's about our ethnic group, not about individual pride, which is very different than American style. So there's a tendency for all of us to think, oh, well, I don't want to be the first one. I want somebody else to be the first. I don't mind being second, third, or fourth, but I don't want to be the first. Well, guess what? Somebody has to be the first. Because if you're not the first, there'll never be a second. And if David Moon didn't step up and say, "I'm going to run for office," we would never have a Korean American in Montgomery County, which is one of the places that have the highest concentration of minorities. And so it's going to be uncomfortable. But always remember, like we said earlier about the personal motivation, it's not about you. It's not about what you can accomplish for other people. And so if you know that you can break through that barrier, be the first one to open the door, then the next person can walk into that door easier. And if you can't open the door, at least try to pick the lock, right? At least try to have a little bit of a crack so that the next person can walk in. And as Hillary Clinton so famously said in 2008, when she didn't win the election, she said, the glass ceiling is still there, but there are 18 million cracks because that's how many people voted for her, right? And I think that's the way we have to think about it. But the second point, and this is real quick, more substantively, you as an Asian immigrant or an Asian American right now coming to this country, even if it's temporarily, you're going to be perceived in a different way than the Asian immigrants that came a generation ago, or 2 generations ago, 3 generations ago. For one reason and one reason only. There are more of us now. There are a lot more of us now than ever before. When I came to America in 1980, we were about 1.5%. Now we're about 7%. And at this rate of the percentages growing up, we're going to be 10% pretty soon. And there's going to be more people that look like us in this country. And they're going to be all over the country, not just in California, New York, and Hawaii, but everywhere, including places like Idaho and North Carolina and places that we normally wouldn't have thought there are Asian Americans. That means that the rest of America is getting used to seeing more of us. And you're going to see more people like us on TV, in entertainment, in the news, in the journalism, in reporting, and in Wall Street, sports. As you see more and more of us breaking through that glass barrier and making it, there'll be more of you there. What that means is that you have to prove that we are here to stay. That we're not just here temporarily. I mean, maybe some of you are, but to be here temporarily and you go back home. But you got to show that we and our people are here. We're just as American as somebody who's been here 400 years. And so you got to have that mentality that I'm here representing that group that's all coming here together.
I'll just throw one very quick anecdote that I'm just thinking of while we're sitting. Well, two. One is that there was a Chinese American elected at the same time as me and Mark, and I swear to God, a white lobbyist comes up to me every day while we're down there and says I'm the Chinese. Every day this happens. Even some of my colleagues, actually, the other elected officials, still get us confused. It's a very irritating but real aspect of that some people do think we look all alike. But almost as part of this dynamic, I mean, having so few public officials out there that look like us, I think it makes me in some ways hyper aware of the image I'm putting out there and whether I'm fitting or creating or crushing a stereotype. And this is not advice, but I will just say that personally, for me, I think it has caused me to be more aggressive in my politics, more outspoken, more out front, decide not to just sort of stay in the background. And it is partly conscious effort to really put the sort of Asian political face out there, not as what the stereotype is in the U.S., as sort of quiet, trying to fit in, and to really give it more of a unique, I think, element to it, because I think that otherwise is the default assumption. Oh, they're good at math. They're, they follow along well, that sort of thing.
I wanted to hold off till the last I could, because I was actually reflecting on, I guess, some painful memories. I live in a district, I represent a district that I've lived in the district all my life. So I've lived in my same childhood home for 41 years. Eventually kicked my parents out, and so I have the house now, but I've lived in the same house all my life. But if you Google map it, or if you look at the census, the area that I live in, it's about 75% white, 29% African American, and then 0.5% Asian, and 0.5% Hispanic. So it's definitely a minority. I'm definitely a minority in the area that I live in. And when I was growing up, in the 70s and 80s, those were even more difficult times. There was a time when I was about 9 years old, and there was a 17-year-old, and because of me being Asian, he didn't like it. We got into a fight, and he beat me up pretty bad. And we ended up going to juvenile court since he was 17. And so the court system, they reprimanded him based on being a juvenile. But I never remember that. I always remember the fist coming at my face, getting kicked in the stomach. And I think about the time too where my family woke up one morning and there was a dead cat hanging in front of our house. Those are painful memories. Those are memories that you never forget. But those are memories for me that made me stronger. I own it. I own the experiences that I've had. And instead of sitting back and getting underneath my blanket or crawling underneath a rock, those kind of experiences made me stronger. And it's a nasty world out there. To me, it's gotten nastier since I was a kid. And you're going to have people out there that are going to do stuff to you and just do you dirty and do you wrong. But you got to choose how you're going to respond. And to get up and fight and don't sit back and figure out how those experiences will make you a stronger person. And I think that, I wish I would never had gone through those experiences, obviously, but those experiences have definitely made me stronger as a person, developed my character, but also has given me a stronger resolve to do what I can to help bring communities together. Whether it be African American and Korean Americans or the Hispanics and the Korean Americans. So multilaterally, just I've made it my resolve to try to bring cultures together.
Thank you very much for that. And kind of how they've been sharing as well too, that there's been kind of the progression of growth on a personal level and within the career, and just kind of the roles that everyone here has really just been playing in the community, and then for themselves and the very diverse demographics. I mean, your role is just as important too. So to kind of tie that together, you're here as cultural ambassadors when you go to your host companies, when you do your internships. So kind of seeing the linkage there and how some of you might be in Idaho. I know that was referenced as well. You could be in any of the 50 states, so which could have various types of makeup for the demographics. So thank you for sharing all of that. On a lighter note, I'm going to segue into just a question about kind of with your different positions, what's your day-to-day kind of work look like, or your week look like? Because I think everyone's going to have very diverse weeks that are going to be slower paced, that are going to be fast paced, or it's kind of a variety from there.
U.S. government is somewhat different from South Korean government that you guys know. In Korea, you have to have lower number to be, I guess, in high positions. But in the U.S. government, you have to have higher numbers. Some people, we call it GS system. I believe that's government service. Grade 1 is really, really low.